Fort Smith for robbery, acquitted. Her story changed when Sam died on December 17th. On No 9th, 1867, the New York Times in an article portrayed the Kiowa leader Satanta as possessing both slyness and negotiation skills alongside boldness and brutality. In 1871, following the assault on Henry Warren's wagon group at Salt Creek in the upper part of Texas, known as the Warren Wagon Train Incident, Satanta, Big Tree, and Satank were the initial indigenous people to face trial in the United States at Jackboro. William Clark Quantrill, who guided the James siblings, commanded Quantrill's raiders during Confederate irregular warfare along the Missouri-Kansas line, striking Union units and settlements. He met his end at the hands of Union troops in May 1865 during the closing skirmishes of the Civil War, passing on a strategic heritage that Frank and Jesse would eventually use in their bandit lifestyles. Calamity Jane and her frontier attire. Martha Calamity Jane Canary dressed in gowns much like other women on the edge of civilization, but her lasting image stems from the 1895 photograph by Henry Lockach and Charles Peterson in Deadwood, South Dakota. She professed to serve as a military scout, though she was probably more of a camp attendant. She wove herself into the legend surrounding Wild Bill Hickok and ended up interred next to him. In 1884, photographer A. Frank Randall produced the earliest photographic documentation of Geronimo, the Chiricahua medicine man-in-chief, at the San Carlos Reservation in Arizona Territory. Among those pictures, the one of Geronimo on his knees clutching a Springfield 1873 rifle is particularly notable. The shoot formed part of Randall's collection and helped solidify his reputation in the public eye. Who was the most infamous enforcer of the law in New Mexico? Many think of Pat Garrett, especially among Hispanic communities. The response is Elfigo Baca. Garrett gained notoriety for shooting a fugitive in a shadowy chamber. Baca in 1884 held off around 80 Anglo cowboys, enduring close to 4,000 bullets and even dynamite blasts. Following this standoff, the unrest in Socorro subsided. A portrait of William F. Buffalo Bill Cody captured in the early 1870s during his time as a U.S. Army scout and bison slayer across the vast plains. The picture documents the period when his renown was building on the frontier, before the touring spectacles that in later years would craft his persona and the lore of the Old West. In March 1886, photographer C.S. Fly from Tombstone, Arizona, joined General George Crook at the Mexican frontier to discuss the capitulation of Geronimo and his Chiricahua Apache band. In Cañón de los Embudos, he created the sole documented images from the conflict, including this scene featuring men, women, and youngsters. In the background, riders on horseback, Ezra Allen Minor, better known as Bill Minor, did time in American prisons for stealing horses and holding up stagecoaches. Freed in 1880, he dove back into wrongdoing and earned the nickname the Gray Fox. In 1904, he executed in Canada what is regarded as the inaugural triumphant train heist. Folklore attributes to him the phrase, "hands up," which became a staple in tales of the West, enigmatic demise. In July 1882, in Arizona Territory, gunslinger Johnny Ringo was discovered deceased near Tombstone with a bullet injury and his firearm nearby. Accounts and witness statements vary. Was it self-inflicted or homicide? Wyatt Earp and buckskin Frank Leslie both asserted they did it, yet the proof stays uncertain. The final photograph of George Armstrong Custer, a cabinet card, was snapped by William R. Howell in New York in April 1876. Just 2 months afterward, Custer would perish along with a portion of the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Mindful of his personal presentation, he sat for over 150 portraits. This particular one belongs to his concluding session. Badman Brooks, or Billy Brooks, acted as a marshal in Newton, Kansas, and subsequently in Dodge City. Following disputed gunfights, he abandoned law enforcement. In 1874, he operated stagecoaches for the Southwestern Stage Company. After the mail deal fell through, he got involved in a plot to plunder competing deliveries. Apprehended, he was hanged by a vigilante group on July 29th. Henry Starr, the bandit, portrayed himself in the movie A Debtor to the Law from 1919, reenacting holdups of banks. A far-off kin to the spouse of Belle Starr, He earned a pardon from Theodore Roosevelt after aiding in subduing Crawford Cherokee Bill Goldsby during a botched breakout. He produced the film right after his release from incarceration. He reverted to criminal acts and was killed during a heist in 1921, Frank Buckskin Frank. Leslie Nash, strict about provenance, acknowledges that the photograph lacks direct evidence tying it to Buckskin Frank. The attribution relies on a verified image. Buckskin Frank achieved notoriety by slaying Billy Claiborne, who lived through the OK Corral gunfight in 1882 at the Oriental Saloon in Tombstone, Arizona Territory. Tom Blackjack Ketchum, an outlaw of the West, appears after his capture, already with his right arm amputated from wounds, suffered while attempting to rob a Colorado and Southern train on April 26, 1901 in the New Mexico Territory. He was hanged for that attempted robbery captured in 1899. The case illustrates the hardening of railroad law. A photograph preserved by the family portrays Seth Bullock, first sheriff of Deadwood, Dakota Territory. In 1876, he and Saul Starr moved to the gold rush town to open a hardware store. After the murder of Wild Bill Hickok by Jack McCall on August 2nd, one day after his arrival, Bullock imposed law in the mining camp. McCubbin recorded in his first historical photograph the sheriff of Lincoln County, Pat Garrett, known for killing Billy the Kid on July 14, 1881. The portrait was taken by James N. Furlow in Las Vegas around 1880 after Garrett captured the gunman in Stinking Springs, then New Mexico Territory, on December 23, 1880, California. Gold miner between 1848 and 1855. The gold rush attracted migrants of many origins and generated demand for portraits. Studio photographs in Jeraroip and Ambroip recorded workers posing with pans and pickaxes as proof of trade for sending to relatives and for advertisements. Today, they rank among the most sought-after images of the Old West, known for the solitary capture of Bill Doulan in 1895. Deputy Bill Tillman appears here in an earlier stage of his career. In 1883 in Kansas, he joined the group of authorities involved in the so-called Dodge City War. The conflict centered on political and public order. Disputes was resolved by agreements without shots fired or deaths. Dancer and European celebrity Lola Montez arrived in California in 1853 and spread the famous tarantula dance in the saloons of the gold rush. In the number with strong theatrical appeal, she shook her dress to expel imaginary spiders, lifting her petticoats. The gesture, half theatrical, half burlesque, guaranteed immediate fame and fueled controversies. Probable historical error. The famous photo attributed to Josie, wife of Wyatt Earp, likely does not depict her. Themage used by Glenn Boyer on the cover of I Married Wyatt Earp, 1976, was advertised in 1880. Research indicates it is actually a photographer from 1914, published under the title Call. Evidence of later commercial reuse. Richard Little Dick West, former member of the gangs of Bill Doulan and Al Jennings, alternated bank and train robberies in Oklahoma Territory. A fugitive, he was tracked by a posy of federal deputies. On April 13, 1898, near Guthrie, he fell under fire led by Bill Tillman and Heck Thomas, ending his trajectory in banditry. At age 20, John Henry Holliday completed his degree at the Pennsylvania College of Dental Surgery. The Cartiz portrait by O.B. Marat, 1872, is one of the rare adult images of the future Doc Holliday, a gunman notorious for the OK Corral confrontation in Tombstone. The piece remained in the family, preserved by his cousin Matty for decades. Dan Thra, an expert on the Apache Wars, fixed Al Spare's legacy in the 1964 biography. Al Spare, Chief of Scouts Spare, a German and Civil War veteran, led George Crook's scouts in Arizona during campaigns against the Chiricahua. In 1887, he was crippled after a shootout linked to the Apache Kid, marking the end of his career. Born in Texas in 1853, John King Pfizer began as a cowboy on southern ranches. Arrested for horse theft, he served a short sentence and returned to the field armed. In the 1870s, he organized a band of outlaws on the border, self-proclaimed ranger, who pursued and executed Mexican raiders in retaliation for incursions. Cattle rustlers of New Mexico Territory. This cabinet card photograph circa 1880 identifies the subjects only as horse thieves of New Mexico. Researchers suspect that the standing man is John Kenny, leader of a gang dedicated to horse and cattle theft in the territory, active in the 1870s and 1880s. Not the chief you think. The label Manga's chief of the Warm Spring Apaches caused confusion. Many mistook him for Mangus Caloris, a 19th-century Apache leader in the U.S. Southwest. In fact, it is his namesake son, photographed by A. Frank Randall in 1886. The Smithsonian holds an albumen copy from the collection of General Nelson A. Miles. In 1885, at William Notman's studio in Montreal, portraits were taken of Sitting Bull alongside Buffalo Bill Cody. The Sioux leader agreed to join Buffalo Bill's Wild West for 4 months. The images circulated as promotional material, marking the meeting of indigenous leadership in the entertainment industry. The Texas Rangers, a police force with state reach and national projection, date back to the Republic of Texas before annexation to the U.S. In 1874, the Frontier Battalion was formed with 6 companies. Company F, recorded on a cabinet card around 1885, exemplifies the organization and the patrol role on frontiers and routes. In 1821, merchant William Becknell opened the Santa Fe Trail, the first international route between New Mexico, then a Mexican province, and the western U.S. frontier. The circulation of merchants, soldiers, settlers, and freight caravans made the city a hub. In the early 1880s, the railroad reduced its use and the route became obsolete. Kidnapped at age 12 in Arizona Territory by Apaches, Felix Tellis followed an unusual path in the Apache conflict. He became a warrior and U.S. Army Scout, receiving the nickname Mickey Free, lived as an Apache on the White Mountain Reservation until 1914. The 1888 photo is attributed to Daniel F. Mitchell and Irwin Bear of Prescott. James Butler, Wild Bill Hickok, is considered the first great gunfighter of the West. He gained fame in the 1865 face-to-face duel in Springfield, Missouri against Dave Tutt, a confrontation that shaped the model for gunfights later filmed. In that same year, he appears in a cart to visit by Charles, Schulten carrying Colt Navy revolvers, in cross-draw known as the Cowboys of the massacre taken around 1885, a cabinet card image by photographers Charles S. Baker and Eli Johnston in Douglas, Arizona Territory, shows real cowboys employed by Texas John Slaughter at the San Bernardino Ranch near present-day Douglas in Prosper, U.S. Mexico cattle hearing. The image records in 1903 a camp of lungers on the outskirts of Phoenix, tuberculosis patients who settled in tents seeking in Arizona's arid climate a treatment then in vogue. There they followed routines of rest, sun, and dry air in a time when medical resources were limited and migration for health shaped the region. The 1887 photograph by photographer John C.H. Grail includes in the copyright record the identification of the mounted cowboy as Fred Pierce, a famous cowboy of Wyoming. However, searches in the 1880 and 1890 censuses in the press of the time and in the Wyoming Territory brand book have not located this character so far. John Burwell Omohandro, Jr., known as Texas Jack, gained fame on drives along the Chisholm Trail. He brought lasso acts to the stage with Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill Cody seen as a pioneer. In 1877, he created the Texas Jack combination. He died of pneumonia in Leadville, Colorado, a month before turning 34. In 1908, Cody commissioned Adam Stone, but recorded his age as 39. Music, highlighted clockwise from the upper left corner. Billy Richardson, Johnny Fry, Gus Cliff, and Charlie Cliff riders linked to the Pony Express. The 1860 image records a group associated with the first express mail routes on horseback, a private service that operated between Missouri and California. Executing a warrant against horse thief Andy Cooper in Hullbrook, Arizona Territory, Apache County Sheriff Commodore Perry Owens opened fire when resisted, killing Cooper and brother Samuel and John Blevins and wounding another Blevins. Months later, in 1888, Emma Albright photographed him in Albuquerque, New Mexico Territory, photographed around 1865. Tibio Vasquez became one of the most well-known Hispanic bandits of the American West. Between 1850 and 1874, he led stagecoach robberies, thefts, and cattle rustling. In 1874, reporter George Beers of the San Francisco Chronicle shot him. Captured, he was tried and hanged in 1875 in San Jose, California. In 1889, Manor in Travis County was consolidating as a small agricultural center in central Texas with modest commercial streets and basic services that served surrounding farms. The official records of 1890 indicate 405 inhabitants, a number that shows a stable community integrated into regional supply routes. Many, when searching for a name of the Old West, recall Wyatt Earp in part because of Bat Mastersonson, a former Army scout, sheriff, and Wyatt's partner. He told Theodore Roosevelt that only Earp could narrate the real West. Aide Stuart Lake heard this, sought him out, and in 1931 published a fictional biography. Part of the accounts attributed to Wyatt were Masterson's own experiences. Cabinet card of Ben Thompson, studio portrait 1875, printed and mounted on stiff card. It shows the notorious gunfighter and Austin police chief posed half-length in formal attire with a neutral background. A typical format of the period used for public sale and circulation in family albums. Mickey Free, Apache scout for the U.S. Army, appears around 1888 alongside his wives Eth and Ohay. Once kidnapped in childhood and later an interpreter among peoples, he took part in campaigns in Arizona. The image records family alliances according to Apache customs. During a period of intense border tensions and in New Mexico, mixed-race frontiersmen. The identity of the portrayed man recorded around 1850 remains undetermined. The daguerreotype, a rare piece, presents a man of mixed ancestry, possibly Metis, in work cloak carrying a knife and an axe. Signs of participation in the frontier economy in a zone of territorial contact and self-defense. Titled The True Cowboy Captured Alive, this 1880s cabinet card records on the left. Cottonwood Charlie Nebo alongside Nicholas Janis, a French-American settler in the Nebraska Territory. Sources place him as a descendant, or perhaps brother of Joseph Antoine, interpreter at Fort Laram in what was then the Wyoming Territory. Around 1890, a carriage is parked in front of the Beaumont Hotel in Oa, Colorado. A stopover point for travelers and merchants connected to local mines. The scene records urban daily life in formation. Wooden facades, dirt street, flow of guests and workers, and the hotel as a landmark of wealth and transportation networks of the period. Among the first records of a fur trapper, this daguerreotype of James P. Beckworth, taken in 1850, was published in his biography released in 1856. Born in Virginia in 1778, the son of an enslaved mother and an Irish overseer, he traveled the West from 1824 until his death in 1866, working in the fur trade and on frontier routes. Peter Bogardus, born into a famous lineage of marksmen, wielded a Remington model 1888 and carried another at his waist. Under the guidance of his father, Captain Bogardus, he joined along with his brothers Eugene, Edward, and Henry, Shooting Axe in Buffalo Bill's Wild West, the traveling show that spread shooting culture at the end of the 19th century. Captain Jack Crawford, the poet scout, gained renown in the West as an Army scout in conflicts with indigenous peoples. Later, he toured stages and schools, published poems and travel accounts, and advocated civic education. His works blended memory and exaltation of the frontier, influencing the image of the West. Portrait from 1881, rare image of a buffalo hunter. Although the slaughter was common in the Old West in the United States, almost no visual records of the hunters themselves remain. This cabinet card, dated around 1880, portrays a man posing with a Sharps rifle, typical equipment of the time in the Payne and Stockdorf studio, Leadville, Colorado. Between 1835 and 1885, former Texas Rangers known as 49ers acted as mercenaries along the border. In exchange for official payments, Mexican state governments hired private companies to suppress Apache and Comanche raids. The human scalp became proof of service and a source of income for these groups in a violent market. In 1845, French gunsmith Louis-Nicolas Floer presented the first single-piece cartridge, a metal capsule combining primer, powder, and projectile. The innovation abolished the separate use of components and set the model that in common usage we call a bullet, guiding the transition from loose load to standardized ammunition in portable firearms. Capture of the Northfield robbers. On September 7, 1876, the James Younger Gang failed in its attempt to rob the bank of Northfield, Minnesota, with members captured. The carte de visite, made by Ira E. Sumner, typical of portraits of prisoners and the dead, is said to have circulated by the thousands. Today, few copies survive in public and private collections. Resident of the Bottom, the bullwhacker in the photo C. 1850, brandishes the whip used to drive oxen hitched to freight wagons. A central profession practiced by men and some women, it kept convoys moving and ensured commercial flow before the railroad. Despite their importance, these drivers occupied the lowest rung of the social hierarchy. Although the photograph bears the caption Arizona Rangers, analysis of the clothing, low crown hats, short coats, and cartridge belts typical of the 1870s, 1880s suggest it was taken in the late 1870s or early 1880s when Arizona was still a territory. The official Arizona Rangers Corps would only be instituted in 1901. At the end of the 1870s, Samantha Fallon managed the San Jose House Hotel and a millinery shop in Tombstone, then Arizona Territory. A cabinet card made by C.S. Fly around 1879 records her image, pointed out as the partner of Ed Shefflin. She ended up marrying Zachary Taylor on December 14, 1880, carte de visite dated 1878 with the portrait of Charles Baudre and his wife Manuela. The copy stained with blood was taken from Baudre's body after the confrontation at Stinking Springs, New Mexico on December 23, 1880, when Lincoln County Sheriff Pat Garrett shot him and in the same action captured Billy the Kid. The James Younger Gang, active in Missouri and neighboring states between the 1860s and 1870s, included Jesse and Frank James and the Younger Brothers. Born from the post-Civil War era, it specialized in bank and train robberies. Press publicity and Pinkerton pursuit expanded its fame until the Northfield fiasco in 1876 in Minnesota. In March 1886, during the negotiations between General George Crook and Geronimo in Canon de los Embudos, Sonora photographer C.S. Fly recorded an Apache wearing a three-piece suit. Fly or his wife identified him as Apache Kid, an identification supported by William Sparks. Historian Granville Stewart, however, contested, "It is not the Kid." In 1887, Cherokee leader Ned Christie was accused without evidence of murdering Federal Deputy Marshal Dan Maples. Pursued for years in Indian Territory, he resisted successive sieges. In 1892, an armed band killed him, dynamiting his hideout. Afterwards, lawmen tied the corpse to a door and posed for photos, displaying him as Atrophy. Around 1900 in Beaumont, Jefferson County, the parent grocery operated under the ownership of Melton Bowie. Recognized as one of the city's first African-American entrepreneurs, Bowie played a prominent role in local commerce. Records cite his skill as a carpenter, a reputation that supported his work in various trades. Deadwood in Dakota Territory was a growing mining camp. Muddy streets, tents, and saloons and rows. The sound of gold pans in the creek and armed vigilance. When Wild Bill Hickok arrived around 1876, the gold fever was attracting migrants, merchants, and gamblers, and formal authority was fragile, maintained by local committees. The image shows Harry Ewan, the mountain man, posing at the top of Berthoud Pass in the Colorado Rockies around 1874. At the time, he worked as a hunter and guide. Years later, he would be recognized as the first park ranger of Yellowstone. The scene indicates the phase of exploration that preceded the formalization of park protection.